Hey guys, hi, welcome back once again. My name is Vaishali, and having learned quite a few things from and through human interactions, and having pursued my master's in business administration and clinical psychology, I today wish to talk about the past, the present, and the future. The interconnection and the overlap between the past, the present, and the future. Our personal and our interpersonal history, his tree, the tree that has many branches and many facets to it, and his story that has many characters and many chapters to it, and how that gets interlaced and overlapped with our present and our future. So many a times, or at least a few times, we'll hear a few or many people say that just focus on the present moment, or that keep your focus on the future goals, on the future aspirations, and think about how you'll be building up whatever that future holds starting today. And then we'll hear people talk about their history. To the degree wherein a quote has also been created which says that history keeps repeating itself, which means that the past keeps overlapping with the present and thereby influencing and impacting the future. And in a way invariably saying that the past then becomes the future, which as history keeps playing itself over and over again, and man never learns from it. And to add to that, when I talked about people who focus on the future, alongside stating that keep your eyes on the future goals, the future aspirations, the future desires, but start working from it right now, from today. So even taking that into account when we even do reach into the future, whatever that future holds, however that future looks, and if we've been able to meet and fulfill those desires, those goals, and those aspirations, we are always asked about the journey. We are always asked as to how we began. We are always asked about the process, the preparation, the steps we took and the steps we did not take, the things that we paid attention to and the things that we did not pay attention to. And even upon attaining and reaching that future wherein we have achieved those goals, those desires, those aspirations, standing with that future, on that future, we are still talking about the history of the making of that future. We are still talking about the past that influenced, impacted, and interacted with the supposedly then present, and then the assumed desired future. And in a way, the past becomes the future. And so hearing it like this and trying to process it like this might seem a little confusing, might seem like we are going round and round the bush and going round and round the circles without truly making any sense. And in order to make some kind of a sense for it, let's take some examples. Let's consider some examples. So let's consider the idea, let's take the idea of us being an independent nation, a democratic sovereign nation. So how do we come to this conclusion, or how did we come to this conclusion that we are an independent, sovereign, democratic nation? Because at one point in time, we were not an independent, democratic, sovereign nation. And that had not always been the case, but there was a point in time, for a few centuries, for a few decades, or a lot of decades, wherein we were ruled by a different nation, a different authority, wherein we were enslaved by somebody else for a lot of years, for a lot of centuries, and for a lot of decades, for a lot of lifetimes. There were a lot of lifetimes that came and that died, naturally or forcefully, organically or abusively, that experienced all of that, at least for a few generations. And that is the collective story of our nation, India. So we can call ourselves the citizen of a nation that's independent, sovereign, democratic, and republic, only because we have had a past experience of not being that, of not experiencing that. Likewise, with regards to the same example in another breath, through another perspective, we can also say that it became a unified nation, now functioning under one constitution, under a unified constitution, only because earlier it was divided into principalities. And in a way, it tells us how the past narrative or the past storyline, the history that carries that storyline, describes our present today. Now let's take another example from the movie Tare Zameen Par, wherein this little kid born into a certain family that was academically driven, that was constantly comparing the two siblings, that was constantly projecting their idea of what good and success is all about onto their little kid, onto their kids and the system itself, on a very personal level, made this child feel inadequate. This child who had a learning disability or an ant, a special way, a different way, a unique way of learning. He was differently abled. And since he was constantly compared and criticized with others and by his own sibling, since he was constantly told that he is not good enough, since he was constantly told that he is a troublemaker, he, in his defiance, to a degree, from the outside, becomes that troublemaker. Which is like saying, and could have been a personal thought in his own head, that you think of me like this, you actually think I'm a troublemaker. So let me show you what a troublemaker looks like. And he becomes like that, of course, from the outside, from the external perspective. But and yet, all he is trying to do, all he is attempting to do, is to find a sense of connection and belonging within his own system, within his own family. And in a way, it is reflected through his drawing book. The drawing book in which he had shown how he is gradually moving away. He is being pushed away from his own family. And or fortunately and unfortunately, it's an outsider who could see this story. It's an outsider who could pick up on this story, on this history, on his personal and interpersonal history. And it is not and it was not the insiders who looked into it. It's not the insiders who could observe that, who could take notice of that and thereby even understand that. And quite naturally, when one cannot understand, it's quite difficult to connect as well. They don't experience a sense of safety and security and a sense of belonging and thereby sense of being loved. And so in a way, even through this story, within the history of this story, it is the flipping of the pages, it is the first page, leading on to the second, leading on to the third, leading on to the 20th, leading on to the 150th, leading on to the almost 200th page that tells me who I am today. It is the assimilation of all of these pages, starting from the first page itself, starting from the characters in the first page itself, to the final page that tells me who I am today, that tells me or tells us who we are today. And many a times when we don't read the entire book, when we don't read the entire story, when we are not interested in reading, in listening, in knowing our own history, his story, my story, our story, your story, we to a large degree cannot even understand ourselves, leave alone somebody else. Because if we straight dive into chapter 16, without knowing the previous chapters, without knowing the entire story and the history, we've not truly taken interest in knowing ourselves and others. We've not truly taken interest in knowing and owning our own story as well. And in a way, to a large degree, we would constantly be shaming and pointing fingers towards the behavior that is manifesting in the present reality, just like it was done to that little kid in Tare Zameen Par, without truly understanding the origin of this behavior, without truly understanding the story behind the behavior, without truly understanding the origin of this person that we today see, or this personality that we today see, and the course of its development, one brick at a time, within a certain system, within a certain family framework. And unless we take time to understand the explicit and the implicit of our own past, present, and thereby a future, we will keep repeating and perpetuating our own stories, our own histories. both individually and collectively, both personally and interpersonally. So, metaphorically, symbolically, let's take the time to not just read the 20th chapter and come to a conclusion, but let's take the time, the effort, and the energy to start reading from chapter 1, from word 1, from the first word itself. Let's look at all of the words, let's look at all of the characters, let's take a real look at all of the chapters that are interconnected, the past, the present, and the future, to understand the entire story and to even take charge of our own stories. To write the present that we wish to write today, being aware as to how the past implicitly and explicitly is impacting our present. And as we write the present for the future, let's try and become aware as to how that past will impact our future and if we need to make any changes, even with regards to one single word, even with regards to one single emotion, even with regards to one single thought, both on personal and on interpersonal levels. Let's try and reflect on our stories, on our histories. That includes us and others, so that we become a little more aware of ourselves, so that we become a little more aware of our own story, both explicitly and implicitly. Let's try and do that for ourselves, and I will see you once again the next week. Till then, stay tuned in. And guys, if you do like the contextual content of these videos, please do like, share, and subscribe.